Hi, my name is Jennifer Lowe, and I'm a Futurist-in-Residence at IDEO, and I teach human-centered design, systems thinking, and strategic foresight at McMaster University and UC Berkeley. Today, I'm going to talk about the importance of futuring as a key leadership capability. The world around us is changing faster than our mental models can compute. AI is transforming the way that work looks, social norms are rapidly shifting, entire systems from healthcare to media to education, even to international relations, are being re architected in real time. The leaders we work with at IDEO frequently ask, how do we make better decisions when the ground is constantly moving beneath our feet? My answer is that leaders and organizations need capabilities and futuring to thrive in that uncertainty. What I've learned as a longtime futurist is that this challenge is about perspective, not just about emerging technologies or disruptive strategies. To thrive in tomorrow's world, we need to see the future not as a straight line, but as a shifting landscape, one that's wide and dynamic and full of complexity, but also full of possibility. We are living in a moment when organizations operate in radically new ways. Everything from distributed workforces to emerging human machine collaboration. And yet, most of our leadership models were built for an era that assumed stability and predictability. The world as we know it is rapidly evolving, and that's why futuring matters now, not as a niche discipline, but as a core leadership skill that's essential to any organization. Futuring is often misunderstood as prediction or forecasting, when in reality it's quite the opposite. It's the practice of exploring multiple plausible futures so that leaders can prepare for uncertainty rather than fear it. The most future ready organizations aren't those that guess the future right. They're actually the organizations that can build the capacity to adapt quickly, to question assumptions, to accept ambiguity, to respond imaginatively and boldly to what comes next, and those that can build stories of the future that they can drive towards with confidence. But our pursuit of building the future, we often recycle outdated paradigms. What professor and futurist Sohail Anatolia called the used future. These are inherited ideas about what good ideas look like, what progress should be, or how systems ought to work with the future in mind. They feel familiar, but they no longer fit in emerging realities. As a futurist, I see used futures everywhere in companies that are optimizing for efficiency when real advantage lies in adaptability, in urban design that continues to prioritize cars, in a world that's demanding better community, walkability, and climate resilience. And probably most painful to me with my long tenure in the health industry, healthcare systems being built for episodic intervention when our needs are both chronic and preventative. We think we're building the future, but far too often we're simply renovating the past. Used futures lull us into repeating yesterday's strategies because they feel safe and familiar and evidence based. But tomorrow demands something very different. So the real question becomes, how do leaders break free of the used future and build futures they actually want? Well, it begins with shifting mindsets. First, to lead effectively in uncertainty requires a shift in mindset from fear to agency. This isn't a theoretical exercise, it's a fundamental leadership posture. A powerful example of this is Lego's response to the rise of digital play. So rather than fearing that screens would destroy physical toy use, leaders reframed the moment as an opening. What unique forms of creativity could Lego empower in a hybrid physical digital future? That mindset shift unlocked partnerships and a renewed strategic vision. Rather than anxiety, agency became Lego's engine for reinvention. Just last week, they introduced a provocative new smart brick at CES, continuing their story of the future. Another necessary shift is from constraint to possibility. One of the most powerful tools we use at IDEO is the question, what would need to be true? This provocation reframes why it won't to how it could, and it expands the field of opportunity. When Ford started its early autonomous mobility work, the team didn't begin with maps of regulatory barriers or engineering constraints. Instead, they asked what would have to be true for cities to embrace autonomous vehicles as part of a healthier safety mobility ecosystem. That reframing opened new directions that would have never emerged if they had started with a mountain of limitations. Asking what would need to be true doesn't make the constraints disappear. It simply transforms them from blockers to design criteria. Finally, we need to shift from what's possible to what's preferable. A future forward leader asks, what tomorrow would we be proud to create? Stories of preferred futures become more than just a vision statement. They can become strategic anchors. Patagonia is a powerful example of this. Rather than optimizing for short term growth, the company articulated a preferred future in which business actively restores the planet. That intentional choice reoriented everything from product design to supply chain investment to employee governance. They didn't wait for sustainability to become an industry standard. They anchored their entire strategy in the future they wanted to design. Once those new mindset shifts are in place, then leaders can start with several new capabilities that set the stage for real transformation. First, capabilities around spotting the signal of future become critical. Signals are the small, early signs of change that we find at the edges: the small startup, the unexpected behavior, the unusual innovation, or a new workaround that hints at something novel. When collected and analyzed, signals reveal patterns that become stories of plausible futures, and this gives leaders the ability to build scenarios of the future that are compelling drivers of change. And signal scanning doesn't have to be complicated. It simply starts with curiosity and intent. Although I now capture signals all the time as a working futurist, I still schedule time every Friday to scan across industries and spaces and discover and explore emerging signals to build scenarios, a practice I started 15 years ago. Last week alone, I collected signals from areas as diverse as lollipops that let you taste music, to airborne wind turbines in China, to the rise of clubs for introverts in San Francisco, to the growing business of apocalypse prepping. These are all signals that could be small scale previews of tomorrow's landscape. The second capability leaders need is to have curiosity across boundaries. Organizations today don't live in neat categories. They live in complex and overlapping ecosystems. And the most advanced leaders are those who can see across sectors, who understand how culture collides with technology, how policy reshapes markets, and how identity shifts across generations can reshape demand. Futuring is not about finding the right answer. It's about widening your aperture so that new possibilities can be seen and then nimbly acted upon. Another key capability is making the future tangible. At IDEO, we rarely talk about the future without making something to help us get our heads around the possibilities: a story, a prototype, or an artifact. Artifacts from a future timeline make the abstract complete. They allow teams to feel the future, not just think about it. And when a future becomes tangible, it becomes real and actionable. Human centered futures become essential here. Too often, future visions focus on technologies or markets and forget that the future is a deeply human experience. When we center on people, on their identities, needs, and hopes, we design futures that are worth living in. Finally, for leaders wondering how to begin, the answer is simple: start near, not far. Start just beyond your existing strategy horizon. If you plan 2 years out, look at 5. If you plan 5 years out, look at 10. This near futuring stretches the imagination without losing people to abstraction. It brings the future close enough to feel real and close enough to influence. To do this successfully, consider embedding the practice into existing organizational rhythms and rituals. Start meetings with identifying signals, gamify it to make it increase engagement. Ask what if questions in strategy and planning meetings, and build and use stories and artifacts of the future to provoke discussions. Futuring shouldn't live in a special deck or in the occasional offsite. It should live in your decision making. And one way to spark this new kind of thinking is to find your futurists. Every organization has people who are natural pattern seers, systems thinkers, and translators of change. People with their fingers on the pulse of what could be. Some organizations formalize this into a futurist-in-residence, a role I've held at IDEO and elsewhere, but a specific role isn't required. Remember, futurists guide an organization to navigate uncertainty with clarity, spot emerging signals and understand them in the context of industry, trends, and drivers, connect technological and other shifts to human behaviors, and help their organizations avoid the gravitational pull of a used future. But these can be leadership capabilities, not just niche skills, and they're increasingly essential. What matters is giving key people the skills, encouragement, and authority to look beyond today's problems and begin considering what the future holds for the organization, both in terms of threats and opportunities. So, what's the outcome when organizations begin thinking like futurists? Well, leaders begin to challenge the inevitability of the present, regularly asking what needs to be true for future strategies and exploring whether those conditions will continue. That unlocks strategic moves that previously felt impossible, leading an organization forward with confidence. Then, when organizations widen the aperture, they begin seeing their space from a systems lens rather than silos or simple structures. This allows them to navigate complexity and build strategies that are more effective in an increasingly dynamic environment. And this, in turn, helps them to better anticipate opportunities and build more resilient, robust, and adaptive teams. Finally, these organizations become skilled at making the future real for all their stakeholders. This helps them make preferred futures imaginable, tangible, and actionable through prototyping, learning faster, pivoting sooner, and when compelling, plausible futures are discovered, they can act on them. Futuring is preparation, not prediction. It helps make better decisions today by exploring what might happen tomorrow. It gives leaders a way to hold uncertainty with more agency and less fear. And it allows organizations to shape futures they actually want instead of inheriting someone else's stale vision of tomorrow. I call myself uh, an optimistic futurist, which is hard right now. And I do, though, because I don't believe the future will be easy, but I believe in our collective capacity to shape it. So start small, start near, ask more provocative questions, make the future tangible, and help your team build readiness for tomorrow's world. Thank you.